I stopped breathing when the doctor said 640 pounds. He clipped my chart to the wall like evidence numbers red-lined across the page. The treadmill cut off at 4 minutes, yet I stood again while his eyes widened, and that was only the beginning. 640 pounds. Dr. Adrian Lynn's voice cut through the quiet exam room like a church bell striking midnight. For a moment, even the ticking wall clock seemed to pause. The fluorescent light above hummed on sterile and relentless, throwing sharp edges across the linoleum floor. It was the same light, the same sound that would haunt Marjorie Keller weeks later when she faced a treadmill test. Outside the clinic window, a swirl of late autumn leaves danced along the curb bright against the gray morning. Inside, however, the room was still carrying the weight of numbers too heavy to ignore. Dr. Lynn adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the printout in his hand. A1C 9.6. Blood pressure 168/98. His tone was measured professional, but the cadence carried a warning. On the chair beside Marjorie, her son Ethan gripped a clipboard until his knuckles whitened. At 28, his posture was still boyish, shoulders hunched when he braced for bad news, but his jaw had set hard in the last few minutes. He watched his mother fidget with the hem of her sleeve, trying to fold herself smaller, though there was no way to hide her frame in the narrow chair. Marge forced a smile, weak and practiced. "It's probably just holiday bloat," she said quickly, her voice fluttering at the edges. "You know, Dr. Lynn, my thyroid acts up from time to time. These things happen." She tried to chuckle, but the sound fell flat in the stale air. The paper cuff on her arm tightened as the monitor blinked again. Marge tugged at it sharply, shaking it loose as if she could shake off the truth. A test sheet slipped from Dr. Guille. Lynn's folder and skated across the floor, its crisp edge whispering against the tile before coming to rest by Ethan's boot. He didn't move to pick it up. Dr. Lynn folded his arms, waiting for the silence to work. "Marge," he said, quieter now, "you've been here before. These aren't numbers we can set aside for later." Her eyes darted to the window, to the orange leaves plastered against the glass. She let out a small laugh. "It's just the season. I always get sluggish when the days shorten. Maybe after Thanksgiving things will even out." Ethan leaned forward. "Mom," he said softly, "that's not what this is." She waved him off, forcing brightness into her voice. "Don't worry so much. I'll cut back a little. I've been through worse." But her hands betrayed her, trembling against her lap. The fluorescent light buzzed louder, or perhaps it only seemed that way as the silence grew dense. Dr. Lynn leaned closer across the desk, his face etched with patience, worn thin. "Marge," he said, each word clear and deliberate, "if you don't change, time may run out." The sentence settled like a stone into water rippling outward. Ethan's throat tightened. He reached to steady his mother's arm, his fingers warm against her cold skin. She pulled back slightly, as though touch itself were proof of frailty. For years, denial had been her shield, a way to keep despair at bay. Yet in that room, with a test sheet lying face down on the floor and the humming light above denial, sounded more like surrender. Ethan whispered, barely audible, "Please, Mom, don't brush this off." His words hung between them, fragile but insistent, a thread leading to the battles yet to come. Outside, another gust pressed leaves hard against the window pane, their color vivid but fleeting, like a warning written in autumn's hand. A soda can hissed open on the kitchen counter, fizz bubbling like a cruel secret. The sharp sound cut through the quiet of the Keller kitchen, mingling with the faint commentary of a late season baseball game drifting from the living room. The air carried the draft of November seeping through window frames that hadn't been sealed in years. Marge held the can in both hands, its cold sweat slick against her palms. She raised it quickly, as if speed might erase evidence. The first gulp burned her throat, sweet and biting, and she shut her eyes as the fizz rolled down. For an instant, there was comfort, an illusion of control. Then came Ethan's voice. Mom. He stood in the doorway, his shoulders filling the frame, eyes fixed on the can. We just left the clinic. Her hand trembled. She tried to set the can down quietly, but the metal clicked against the counter too loud in the stillness. It's just one, she muttered, not meeting his eyes. Ethan stepped into the kitchen, weariness in every movement. He didn't shout. Shouting had never worked. Instead, he sighed heavy, the sound of someone watching a storm roll in without shelter. He took the can, poured the rest into the sink, the fizz foaming down the drain. The silence after was heavier than words. The TV announcer called a strike, his voice cheerful, and detached a cruel counterpoint to the tension in the room. From outside, faint footsteps crunched over leaves. Mrs. Campbell, their neighbor, paused under the street lamp. Through the window, Marge caught the quick turn of her head, the half shake, the pitying look, before she moved on. It stung more than the soda sugar. Marge turned away, pressing her hands to the counter for balance. People are always watching, she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He reached for the fridge, tugged the door shut when it hung open, then walked out, the sound of his footsteps muffled but sharp to her ears. Later that night, she lowered herself onto the porch chair, the old wood creaking under her weight. The porch light glowed faintly, casting a halo that seemed smaller than it had years ago. She leaned back, breath coming in short bursts. Each inhale scraped, each exhale trembled. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing the rhythm to slow. The radio inside shouted suddenly, a crack of joy. Home run! Marge's lips moved before she realized she had spoken. I can't even walk to the mailbox. The confession hung in the air, carried on the cold. Ethan stood in the doorway behind her shadow, stretched across the porch boards. His eyes glistened, though he quickly looked away, as though her words were more than he could bear to hear. For a while, neither moved. The only sound was the buzz of the porch light, steady, indifferent. Then a small shuffle at the door. An envelope-sized flyer slid through the slot, landing against the rug. Ethan bent to pick it up, reading the bold letters, Thanksgiving potluck, Grace Lutheran. Sunday soon p.m. He turned it over, then quietly tucked it onto the fridge, a silent marker for something beyond soda cans and porch lights. The house settled around them, the game still playing to no one. Outside, the neighbor's window flicked off, leaving the street lamp to burn alone. I brought you something, Ruth Delgado said, setting a spiral notebook on the church hall table. The paper cover was soft, with use, the kind of blue that reminded people of winter skies. Inside, 12 weeks marched down the page in neat columns, boxes waiting for check marks, a ticking clock in paper form. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving at Grace Lutheran, and the fellowship hall had the particular warmth of casseroles and coffee. Someone's pumpkin pie steamed gently near the window, and coats crowded the rack by the door. Marge stood half and half out of the circle of conversation, one hand pressed to the edge of the table, the other fidgeting with a folded napkin. The fluorescent fixtures hummed in a patient way, as if even the lights knew the town rhythms of potluck and prayer. Ruth drew a chair beside her. "One block at a time, Marge," she said, tapping the first column. "That's how change begins. 10 minutes today, 12 tomorrow. If you can go a little farther, fine. If not, we write down what you did and come back tomorrow." Her tone was plain and steady like a nurse's hand on a pulse. Ethan hovered behind his mother's arms folded, relief easing his shoulders as Ruth spoke. He had the look of a man who could breathe for the first time in days, but he stayed quiet, letting the older woman's calm take the room. A shadow touched the table. "Just one slice, dear," a churchgoer murmured, already tipping the pie server toward a plate. The crust shone with sugar, the cinnamon smell rising like a memory of every holiday Marge had tried to eat her way through. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't snap. Instead, he reached for the coffee, refilling his mother's cup as if the motion might redirect the offer. "Thank you, but we're good," he said, pleasant enough, the edge tucked away. From somewhere behind them, voices in a low braid. "She won't make it past Christmas." A second voice, softer, not unkind, but heavy with certainty. Bless her heart. The words threaded through the clink of forks and the scrape of chairs across the floor. Marge felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The napkin twisted under her fingers. Shame had a taste dry cottony, and she swallowed against it. Under the table, she placed a palm on her thigh to steady the tremor and found to her surprise that she was angry. Not the bright anger that starts a fight, but the deep old kind that asks, "Why is my struggle?" Your conversation. Ruth didn't look toward the whisperers. She pointed at a line in the notebook. "Write the days you walk with a pen you like. Makes it a little ceremony." Her eyes, warm and sharp, flicked up. "Start tonight if you can." A woman with a gray bob and a waitress's quick hands. May slipped a napkin holder closer to Marge's plate, straightening the salt and pepper as if by habit. "You two need anything?" she asked, the corners of her mouth lifting. "Coffee's fresh." She moved on with a tray, the kind of quiet presence churches make room for without asking why. When she was gone, Marge noticed a small postcard tucked into the steel napkin holder. A lighthouse sketched in simple lines, a beam penciled across the paper sea. No message on the back, just the image itself, a reminder that light can be small and still be light. The phone in Ethan's pocket buzzed against the chair. He glanced at the screen, Dr. Lynn, and looked to his mother. "Do you want me to—" "Put it on speaker," Marge said, surprising herself. Her palms were damp, but there was a steadiness under the damp. Ethan tapped the button and set the phone between the coffee cups. The fellowship hall, noises kept on children's shoes, tapping a hymn leaking from the sanctuary. But the speaker's static gathered a different kind of attention. "Hello, Marge." "Hello, Ethan." Dr. Lynn's voice came through, thin with distance, but unmistakably firm. "I wanted to follow up while things are fresh." Ruth slid her chair closer, not interrupting, simply there. May passed with another tray, slowing a fraction, then continuing on. We're at the point, Dr. Lin said, where the next 90 days matter more than the last 9 years. Paper rustled on his end. You need to lose at least 45 pounds in 90 days by February 1st. The numbers landed like weight plates on a bar. He didn't stop there. You also need to complete 6 consecutive minutes on a treadmill without support. Bring blood pressure to 135 over 85 or below, and drop A1C to 7.5 or lower. If those conditions aren't met here, the connection crackled. The surgical evaluation will be canceled. Insurance won't approve, and I won't recommend it. I'd rather be honest than false hope you. The room did not go silent. No church hall ever truly does, but the sounds gathered at the edges. Marge nodded, though the phone couldn't see it. I hear you, she said. Her own voice surprised her again, not brave exactly, but not collapsing. What do I do first? Walk, Dr. Lin answered. Short, daily, documented. I've uploaded a 1-page summary to your portal. Print it and put it somewhere you'll see it. And let people help you. That part counts too. His tone softened on the last sentence, like a man who had learned that compliance is sometimes about trust before it's about numbers. We will, Ethan said, and meant it in a way he had not known how to shape into words before. He ended the call and stared at the phone a moment longer, as if the digits might rearrange into something easier. Ruth tapped the notebook. First square this evening. 10 minutes around your block. She didn't offer pie to soften the edge. She offered a pen. Marge took it. The pen was an ordinary ballpoint, the kind you find in a kitchen drawer, but the ink made a bold line in the first box. She handed the notebook back with a small, unfancy nod. Okay, she said. The whispers resumed behind them, carried on the steam from the coffee urn. May's tray clicked against the edge of a table, a small, accidental bell. She lifted the napkin holder as she wiped and left it a little closer to Marge's elbow, the lighthouse beam pointing toward the hallway door, where beyond the winter sun was already tilting down. That night, the Keller kitchen lights burned soft. Ethan logged into the patient portal and found the summary, a 1-page sheet with the clinic letterhead and those same conditions in bold. The printer coughed and fed it out warm as it landed in his hand. He smoothed the page against the refrigerator, then pressed a magnet over the top edge. Just below it, he slid the lighthouse postcard, which he had pocketed without comment. The image looked small but stubborn. The microwave clock's colon blinked steady as a heartbeat. The wall clock near it ticked in round seconds. Ethan stood back, reading the words again. 45, 90 days, February 1st. The numbers made a metronome of the room. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. In the doorway, Marge rested one hand on the jamb, watching the paper as if it were a face she would need to learn by sight. Tomorrow, she said, and the word seemed to try out its own weight. We start tomorrow. Outside, the porch light threw a modest circle onto the stoop. Inside, the refrigerator door clicked shut with a seal, and the lighthouse's penciled beam pointed at the clock at the form. At the small space where a life can turn. Just to the stop sign and back, Ethan said, offering his arm like a slow dance invitation. No race today, just air. The December dusk wrapped the Lancaster neighborhood in a pale blue hush. Salt crunched beneath their boots, and the air turned each breath into a visible cloud. Marge clutched the zipper of her coat with one hand, the other braced on Ethan's arm. The sidewalk seemed longer than she remembered, but the rhythm of steps, 1, 2, pause, began to steady. The stop sign glowed faintly under a street lamp, red against the fading sky. Marge reached it, resting her palm against the cold metal pole. Her cheeks flushed, not only from the air. She looked at her son, then at the stretch of sidewalk behind. Without prompting, she shuffled 2 steps beyond the sign. Her lips parted in something like a laugh, thin but real. "Back we go," Ethan murmured, matching her rhythm. The walk home was no easier, but her pace didn't break. By the time they reached the porch, she was breathing heavy but upright. The porch light clicked on by timer, throwing its halo across the steps. It looked for once like encouragement. Later that week, the bell above the Red Rose Diner door gave its soft ding as they entered. Yellow lamps glowed over booths worn smooth by decades of elbows. May was behind the counter apron, tied pencil tucked into her bun. She slid a plate across to Marge, eggs, roasted tomatoes, a handful of winter berries. No grease sheen, no heap of fries. "Coffee's on the house," Hun May said, pouring into a thick white mug. She tucked a scrap of paper beneath it before sliding it closer. In penciled script, "Keep a light on." Ethan dropped 2 singles into the tip jar. The clink rang brighter than usual. Ruth appeared with a wool scarf wound high against her chin. She carried the same spiral notebook and leaned over the booth. "Week 1 through 2, she said, drawing check marks in firm strokes. 10 to 12 minutes once or twice a day. You've got this." She touched Marge's shoulder gently, then moved on toward the door, leaving the smell of cold air and wool behind. Marge held the notebook as though it were both anchor and weight. The check marks seemed small, but they were proof. The treadmill room at the clinic was another kind of stage white walls, machines humming the steady beep of monitors marking time. A tech nurse clipped wires to Marge's arm and nodded. "Let's see what we've got today." The belt began to move. Marge's feet fell into rhythm, slow but steady. 1 minute passed, then 2. Her chest rose sharp, but she pressed on. Ethan stood to the side, counting softly under his breath. At 3 minutes, sweat dampened her temples. At 4, her hands twitched toward the rails. At 4 minutes 45, she gripped hard, shoulders sagging. The belt slowed, then stopped. Silence filled the room, broken only by the monitor's idle beep. The nurse read the clipboard, weight down 28 pounds, A1C 8.2. Not enough yet. His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. Marge stared at the floor tiles until their diamond pattern steadied. Her legs trembled, body begging to sit. Ethan stepped close. 1, 2. He counted, offering no hand this time, only the rhythm of numbers. Marge pushed against the chair arms, shoulders rolling back until she stood again. Her chest heaved, but her gaze lifted to the humming lights. "I'm not done," she said, not to Ethan, not to the nurse, but into the air itself. The lights buzzed in reply, indifferent yet present. That evening they returned to the diner. The bell dinged, softly as before. May was wiping a table rag in hand. She set it down, looked at Marge a long moment, then finally spoke what she hadn't before. I'm a trustee at Lancaster Health Foundation, she said, her voice even. Come at 9 tomorrow. We can cover nutrition counseling and a PT pass through January. She set a small folder by the salt shaker. On its tab, carefully penciled again, was a lighthouse beam cutting across paper C. Steam curled from Marge's mug of black coffee, rising into the diner's warm air. The lighthouse sketch pointed toward the window where the night pressed close and the porch lights of town winked on one by one. On the Keller kitchen calendar, a ladder of neat X's climbed one square at a time through December day, 83 day 84, day 85. Each cross, a record of a small decision kept. The pencil marks looked ordinary, but Ethan had learned to pause each morning to let his mother press the point into the box, as if hearing the scratch of lead made it more real. On the counter lay her laminated meal plan. In the corner of each page, someone may, by the curve of the hand, had begun stamping a tiny lighthouse icon. It sat next to the protein counts and vegetable servings, a small reminder that even light the size of a stamp could guide. Every evening, Marge left the porch light burning until Ethan returned from his post office shift. He said nothing about it, but when his headlights swept the driveway and the bulb glowed above the stoop, he always felt steadier. The community gym smelled faintly of rubber mats and instant coffee from the staff desk. A space heater buzzed in the corner trying to keep up with the draft. Ruth leaned down, adjusting Marge's stance on the treadmill before the warm-up. Short stride. Think string from your crown to the ceiling, she coached, voice brisk but not unkind. The cuff hissed as Ruth checked her blood pressure. 134/84 after 3 minutes rest, she read, eyebrows rising. Marge exhaled, shoulders releasing, and nodded. These were numbers that didn't scold. They steadied. Outside, a hand-lettered sign taped to the gym door reminded all who came and went, bundle up. It's a cold one. Marge touched the paper as she left fingertips resting just long enough to make the words part of her walk. At the Red Rose Diner, May lifted 2 to-go containers, steam fogging her glasses. Turkey and green beans. Skip the roll today. Marge nodded, no hesitation. The decision was easier now, not a loss, but a choice. May smiled and slid the boxes into a paper bag. You'll thank me later, she said with a wink, then rang the register. Ethan dropped 2 singles into the jar. The coins inside chimed like a bell choir. Gratitude was a reflex now, part of the rhythm. The coffee was black, no sugar. May had swapped cinnamon into the shaker weeks ago. A sprinkle over the cup lifted a warmth that wasn't heavy, just enough to keep the habit alive without tipping it back into harm. The scale at the clinic settled with a faint click. Ethan leaned, close eyes on the digits. 47 pounds down, the nurse announced. His exhale was sharp, almost a laugh. On the printout, the A1C line dipped neatly, clipping 7.5%. Ruth circled the number in green ink, then without comment drew a tiny lighthouse beside it. The symbol had begun to follow them everywhere quietly, like a refrain. Marge ran her thumb across the circle as though to test whether the ink would smudge. It didn't. Her eyes lingered on the number. It wasn't victory yet, but it was possibility. When the sidewalks glazed with ice, Marge and Ethan took laps at the mall walkers' loop, joining retirees in white sneakers who waved each time they passed. The squeak of rubber soles echoed through the empty corridors, broken only by the thrum of a distant escalator. On benches scattered along the route, red poinsettias wilted in foil pots. One afternoon, they finished their laps and sat on the post office steps, snow lifting across the street in thin sheets. The flag on a porch opposite their view flapped stiff, then sagged, then stilled again, as though the air itself was catching its breath. Ethan scrolled his phone. "Final test tomorrow," he said quietly. Neither spoke after. The silence wasn't despair anymore, it was preparation. The treadmill hum had become familiar, less an enemy than an exam. Marge's sneakers pressed into rhythm, each step deliberate. 1 minute. 2. Ethan counted breaths, not seconds. At 4, Ruth nodded approval from the corner. At 5, Marge's jaw clenched, but her hands stayed loose at her sides. At 6, the belt slowed on its own. She stepped down upright, chest heaving, but steady. The machine spat paper in a rough ray, and Dr. Lin tore it free. His eyes flicked across the numbers, then up. "You did it," he said. 3 words measured and warm. Blood pressure, 134/84. A1C, 7.5. Weight, 47 lbs. Treadmill, 6 minutes unassisted. Numbers that held. Marge pressed a hand to her heart, not to calm it, but to acknowledge it. Ethan rubbed his palms over his jeans, grinning despite himself. Dr. Lin flipped the page, scribbled a note, and slid an appointment card across the desk. Eligible to schedule surgical evaluation, he confirmed. The date was written in neat block letters, December 24th, 3rd, 15 p.m. Ethan tucked the card into a manila envelope, sealing it with a practiced press, his postal clerk's script already in mind for the label he would add later. He slid it carefully into his bag. For once, he didn't feel the need to hurry. Outside, snow tapped against the clinic window, small but steady, the kind of weather that asked for endurance instead of speed. On Christmas Eve, the Keller porch light burned honey gold against a sky full of slow snow. Coffee steam braided the air like ribbon as Marge adjusted her scarf. Ethan stood behind her, holding out her coat with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for every zipper, every sleeve. She slipped her arms in and paused beneath the glow. The light spilled across the steps, catching on the snowflakes as they fell. 5 houses. Then the church, she said, voice steady. "We'll count them." Ethan nodded, falling in step beside her. The walk was no race. Their boots pressed prints into the powder pairs side by side, breaths fogging in rhythm. The stop sign at the corner, once a summit, now passed without fanfare. They counted softly together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until the church doors came into view. Garland stretched across the railings, bells drifting out from the sanctuary. The fellowship hall was warm with casseroles, warm rolls, and voices softened by holiday cheer. Folding tables lined the space, foil lids peeled back to release steam. May crossed the room in a cardigan pinned with a lighthouse brooch. She carried a thermos under her arm and a smile that had the ease of long practice. She pressed the laminated postcard into Marge's hand. The paper beam, still penciled, pale blue, gleamed under the hall lights. "Keep a light on for yourself, too," May said. Ruth appeared, next wool scarf, looped high clipboard left at home tonight. She squeezed Marge's shoulder gently. "See you after the holidays. One step at a time still works in January. Her smile carried no deadlines, just a reminder that paths don't end at markers. At the refreshment table, Marge poured her coffee, black steam curling against her face. A neighbor set down a tray of cornbread and offered a simple, "You take care now." Mrs. Campbell, the same neighbor who once shook her head under the street lamp, met Marge's eyes from across the table. No words, just a nod, slow and certain, like a truce. The donation jar for the Health Foundation filled with small bills. Ethan slipped in the receipt stub from the manila envelope, a quiet thank you to the system and people who had made room. Dr. Lin waved from the doorway, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his smile for once free of charts. "We'll talk options next week," he called. Marge stood still a moment, letting the hall fold around her. The bell from the sanctuary rang steady, unhurried. She realized this was not a crest to be conquered, but a landing, a place where the ground held. The world hadn't judged her tonight. It had made space. Later, back at the house, Ethan waited longer than usual to reach for the porch light switch. When it clicked off, the room kept its warmth. The fridge still held the appointment card, waiting for December 24th, 3:15 p.m. But the house itself held something steadier, the practiced rhythm of breath, the long beam of a small lighthouse, and two pairs of boots set side by side to dry by the door. The porch light glowed steady against the Christmas snow, and the laminated postcard with its penciled lighthouse rested beside a family photo, no longer a warning, but a keepsake. Marge's breath came easy now, the coat button no longer straining, her eyes calm as the church bell drifted through the night air. Some journeys close, not with noise, but with a small steadiness that holds a meal, shared a neighbor's nod, a promise written in pencil and kept. Even late in life, gentleness can still finish the work that urgency could not. Has life ever offered you a quiet second chance? If so, share it below. And if you'd like more stories like this, feel free to subscribe and stay a while.